Hi there, fellow teachers and students. So I'll be introducing you to qualitative research. This is actually an old presentation I have many years ago, and I am converting it now to this YouTube video so I can clean my hard drives. And again, guys, I will create more content on academic research, so please subscribe to my channel if you want to learn more about research. Now, what is research? To the layman, it is simply knowing things or attempting to know about things. You can use your five senses, you can do some rationalizing, you can ask experts or group consensus, and of course, apply the scientific method. Now, all of this, the primary purpose of all of this is to know. And again, if you want to elevate it to a higher level, we just have to make it systematic. Now, systematic knowing means you employ or you are employing a method or a family of methods to obtain a trustworthy information about a phenomenon, to address a problem, to gain insight and predict outcomes, to establish knowledge, or to feed your curiosity. How do you treat knowledge and the world around you? Is it an external reality that will always be there even without your consciousness? Or an observer's reality that happens in your mind? Now, how you look at the world will determine how you will proceed into knowing it. You may go directly into the exactness of things using a powerful measuring device, or look for more meaning and understanding using the rich descriptions that you conceive in your mind or other people's minds. Ontology is the study of being. That is the nature of existence and what constitutes reality. So for example, for positivists, the world is independent of our knowledge of it, so it exists out there, while for relativists and others, there are multiple realities and ways of accessing them. Ontology is how you treat the world. A different concept looks into how you are going to know the world. And that is epistemology. Actually, guys, these two are relative because, of course, how you treat the world will also determine how you are going to explore it. Ontology embodies understanding of the world, while epistemology tries to understand what it means to know. And epistemology provides a philosophical background for deciding what kinds of knowledge are legitimate and adequate. In research, of course, the term epistemology is used more often. Now, this table is familiar to all students of qualitative research. It was suggested that an interrelationship exists between the theoretical stance adopted by the researcher, the methodology and methods used, and the researcher's view of the epistemology. So based on this, it's easy to look at where the quantitative researchers are. Of course, they are objectivists who follow the theoretical perspectives of positivism and are more comfortable with experimental research. Positivism argues that reality exists external to the researcher and must be investigated through the rigorous process of scientific inquiry. Since we are on the qualitative side of this presentation, it would be more relevant to follow more the constructivist or even the subjectivist approaches. Constructivism do not subscribe to the idea that truth and meaning do not exist in some external world, but are created by the subject's interactions with that world. Meaning is constructed, it's not discovered, so subjects construct their own meaning in different ways, even in relation to the same phenomenon. For subjectivism, meaning does not emerge from the interplay between the subject and the outside world, but is imposed on the object by the subject. Subjects do construct meaning, but do so from within collective unconsciousness, so like from dreams or from religious beliefs. In research, should we begin with theory, or should theory itself result from the research? Here we have inductive reasoning from specific observations to generalizations, and eventually theories. Now I can be more into inductive reasoning by starting from scratch and build a larger picture later. Induction moves from fragmentary details to a connected view of a situation. On the other hand, if you are into testing the established findings or testing if a theory really works in any given environment, you are into the deductive route. So you may try to refute the convention and establish an alternate hypothesis after going back into the specifics. So think of deductive approach as like reviewing a known paradigm or theory by looking again at its parts. Eventually, you will know if the theory still applies or it is no longer true. Deduction begins with a universal view of a situation and works back to the particulars. But take note that induction is the most common route for qualitative studies. And as expected, these methods are not mutually exclusive. So meaning we can combine both to ensure the highest level of reliability. That is why there is what we can call as mixed method research. But again, just a word of advice, you still need to choose the dominant system or method if you are doing mixed method research. Just like how the left and the right brain works. So one has to be the ultimate decision maker. But of course, there are instances where this line of thinking can be wrong. I hope that this series of slides will help us understand the intricacies and primary differences between the more popular quantitative methods and, of course, qualitative methodologies. I would like to add that when choosing your thesis or dissertation panel members, do not get members who are not qualitative researchers. If your work is qualitative, they will only ruin the deliberation of your proposal or final paper. Because again, they are simply clueless of the methodology. They are more of a problem than of help to your study. Now, one of the primary characteristics of qualitative research is that there is preference for holistic description of complex phenomena in their naturalistic settings. In the Islam community, for example, a qualitative researcher may want to investigate on the way of life of the people here, why they live here, how they make a living, or their conceptions of poverty and maybe being happy amidst the situation that appears to be depressing. It's a complex issue, so there is a good story behind that will only be understood if you go into a more deeper investigation. Numbers can be used to describe this, but again, many will disagree as to the right quantity, so looking at the quality will be more relevant. It is, however, important that you leave it in its natural state. So you must not manipulate things as you write the story. Next, qualitative research integrates a more subjective human experience. Now, subjectivism is a school of thought that considers truth to be in the mind of individuals or subjects, meaning everyone has a different take on reality. This tree, for example, can be a tree, a fruit, or money, depending on how it is processed by human mental constructs. This is the primary reason why qualitative research is not popular in natural sciences, because again, natural scientists, for example, are empirical. They only believe in objective reality that are measurable. It is obvious that being subjective means also being biased. It can affect the integrity of qualitative research, of course, if you allow it. Now, qualitative research cross-checks sources of information. You also get the most appropriate informants, and you should do rigorous, in-depth investigations to help reduce bias. The primary goal of a qualitative investigation is to understand, describe, and discover. Understanding is a result of exploration that will soon make you explain things. You must be able to identify patterns, themes, preconceived ideas, or tentative models that can provide an initial understanding of a phenomenon. So, exploration is the early stage of understanding in a qualitative investigation. It's like a bird's eye view on what to do next. Discover. What is discovered here are actually meaningful interpretations, not fixed bodies of information that is common in quantitative studies. Again, don't forget this. What is to be discovered, again, are meaningful interpretations. That's our keyword, interpretations. For example, after interviewing teachers about their use of technology in their teaching, I was able to figure out that they are actually reluctant to use technology. Not because they do not see it as an advantage, but because they are reluctant to invest the resources like money and time to incorporate something that they might think is not really a requirement for good teaching. Now, we can interpret that these teachers are already contented with their old ways of delivering learning. Now, discovering such interpretations will make us look for possible ways to probably change their mindsets, if that is the goal of our research. Okay, another important thing to remember is that the researcher should be the primary research instrument, and the research design is kept flexible and evolving. Again, great responsibility is placed on the researcher, who must ensure that procedural bias is kept to the minimum. It is also the researcher's discretion to choose the best informants for the study and will decide what is important from all the responses. So bringing in all his or her own perspectives to the selection and providing meaning to the data. Now, if you rely on random informants, they are more likely to provide unfocused information. Qualitative researchers are vulnerable to validity issues, and they are always attacked by quantitative researchers who are most of the time engrossed with their validity that are expressed in numbers. But the fact is, a greater amount of effort and attention is made by qualitative researchers to ensure validity compared to quantitative researchers that only rely on specific design control. Now, to show you how rigorous a qualitative research has to be in ensuring validity, you check this out. Now, validity can be spoken of in different terms. So it can be called credibility, trustworthiness, dependability, and confirmability. So let's start with prolonged engagement. This means taking time to investigate the phenomenon so that you will not just draw immediate conclusions from superficial responses or isolated idiosyncrasies. This involves doing plenty of interviews, even going back to ask for more questions from the informants, even after you have already interviewed them. So, meaning one should question a researcher who was able to finish a qualitative study in only days or a few weeks. Rich, thick descriptions. A sufficient level of detail must be presented so that many will be convinced or will be drawn to the same conclusions. Triangulation means using multiple sources of data. For example, in my study involving the use of exotic animals in K-12 science education, I interviewed almost all representative stakeholders, from students to school principal to guidance counselors, administrators, and parents. I did not only rely on interviews, I also set up a group discussion and I invited an exotic pet hobbyist to clarify a lot of issues. So this allowed me to build a complete picture of the possibility, for example, of integrating exotic animals in K-12 science education here in the Philippines. Member checking is a strategy wherein you inform your informants of your findings and conclusions. So this will make them confirm that what you place there in the results are consistent with their experience and that their perspectives are accurately portrayed. It is easy to just place something in another person's mouth, and we know that many unscrupulous researchers do this here in the Philippines. Presenting discrepant information or anything negative or contrasting to your findings is a sign that you welcome critical insights, and that affirms people that you are not totally blinded by your evaluation or assessment of the phenomenon. There are findings that are too good to be true, signifying that the researcher has been dishonest. Clarifying researcher bias. Here, you must acknowledge your biases or preconceptions that can eventually color your conclusions. This requires a great deal of honesty. Only you can control this as a researcher. You must not place yourself in the center of the analysis. So you need to set aside these biases and let the truth come out. Unless you are hiding something or protecting somebody else's interest. So why should you prevent the truth to come out in your research? Peer debriefing is a sort of peer reviewing. So you allow your work to be criticized by third-party researchers to get insights that are protected from your own bias. A peer should be in the same discipline as you and must be familiar with your study. So it's like getting advice from a friend to confirm if your study makes sense. An external auditor, on the other hand, is somebody who is not familiar with both the researcher and the study, but has the ability to review the study's overall logic and perhaps its coherence and consistency. Now, after presenting all of this to you guys, dear quantitative researchers, you should not underestimate qualitative research. Because again, they go far beyond utilizing control designs to ensure validity. But watch out for unscrupulous researchers who does not follow any of this. Of course, it's easy to manipulate everything to your liking and to exploit the flexibility that is innate in qualitative methodology. There are many ways to formulate excuses and ways to cover up data. Okay, it's time to present to you the common qualitative methodologies that I know. Obviously, I cannot give you everything, but I believe that these methodologies are enough for this introductory lecture. Narrative research is the study of the life experiences of an individual as told to the researcher or found in documents and archival material. The researcher in narrative research describes in some detail the setting or context within which these special events occurred. Now, different forms of narrative research exist. In a biography, for example, the researcher writes and records the experiences of another person's life. You also have an autobiography, which is written and recorded by the individual or individuals who are the subject of the study. A life history portrays an individual's entire life, while a personal experience story is a narrative study of an individual's personal experiences. You also have an oral history, which is consists of gathering personal reflections of events and their causes and effects from an individual or several individuals. Phenomenology. Now, this is an exploration via personal experience of prevailing cultural understandings, because it is believed that social reality has to be grounded in people's experiences of that social reality. So, phenomenology insists that we must lay aside our prevailing understanding of the phenomena and revisit our immediate experience of them in order that new meanings can emerge. So guys, our keyword here is experience. We consider truths if they are experienced by people. You will, for example, understand why some people extremely hate uh, President Ferdinand Marcos, while some do not. So what are these people's experiences? The key is gaining the subjective experience of the subject, sometimes by trying to put oneself in the place of the subject. Again, value is ascribed not only to the interpretations of researchers, but also to the subjects of the research themselves. Phenomenology assumes that there is some commonality to how humans perceive and interpret similar experiences. So they seek to identify, understand, and describe what they refer to as the essence of the experience. Now the researcher hopes to gain some insight into the world of his or her participants and of course to describe their perceptions and reactions. For example, what is it like to teach science using limited resources or using plenty of technological resources? So we can only get data from teachers who were able to experience these conditions. In a grounded theory study, the researchers intend to generate a theory that is grounded in data from participants who have experienced the process. In other words, researchers start with the data they have collected and then develop generalizations after they looked at the data. So there is a continual interplay between the researcher, his or her data, and the theory that is being developed. Now, the data in grounded theory studies are collected primarily through one-on-one interviews, focus group interviews, and participant observation by the researcher. But it is an ongoing process. Data are collected and analyzed, a theory is suggested, then more data are collected. Then you can revise the theory. Then more data are collected again. Now the theory is further developed, clarified, revised, and the process continues. So it's also a requirement that you have plenty of data to work with. If you have insufficient informants to be able to provide rich data, grounded theory is definitely not for you. You may want to consider heuristic inquiry in the next slide. Heuristic inquiry is a process that begins with a question or a problem which the researcher tries to illuminate or find an answer to. Now, the question itself is usually focused on an issue that has posed a personal problem and to which answers are required. So it's a self-directed search and immersion in active experience. Let's say to get inside the question by becoming one with it. Now, I want to use as an example my study on educational technology integration of teachers. So I made interviews, but eventually there is something lacking from the information that I got from the informants. Because again, sometimes it's hard to squeeze information from people who do not have enough experience. So this made me decide to do the immersion myself, to experience advanced educational technology integration via self-training and self-discovery. And this enabled me to investigate on the various aspects of technology use and integration by teachers. Also, I was able to conceptualize the creation of my self-training program, which of course I will freely share with everyone as soon as I publish my work. According to Mustakas, who is the primary mover of heuristic inquiry, one of the primary processes of heuristic research is self-dialogue, in which the researcher enters into a conversation with a phenomenon and is questioned by it. Let's now have a case study. The study of cases has been around for some time. Students in medicine, law, business, and the social sciences often study cases as part of their training. What case study researchers have in common is that they call the objects of their research as cases, and they focus their research on the study of such cases. I also made a case study once. So I studied how a group of pre-service teachers respond to an intervention that I made myself so that they can improve their research competence. So I work with these students. They are actually biology students. And in the development of the research proposals, I gave the intervention. So before anything else, I did not assume that the data that I will get from the investigation will hold true to all pre-service teachers in the entire Philippines. But it really did provide insights on the various aspects of student research competence and the great value of collaboration with both peers and mentors have been very useful in increasing their research competence. Take note that what they sometimes refer to as action researches can be included under case studies because again these are limited to improving the practice of the practitioner or the researcher in his or her limited professional niche. Ethnography. Now guys, ethnographic research is in many respects the most complex of all research methods. A variety of approaches are used in an attempt to obtain as holistic a picture as possible of a particular society, group, institution, setting, or situation. The emphasis in ethnographic research is on documenting or portraying the everyday experiences of individuals. The key tools, in fact, in all ethnographic studies are in-depth interviewing and ongoing participant observation of a situation. Researchers try to capture as much as what is going on as they can. So, of course, the whole picture, so to speak. And the final product is a holistic cultural portrait of the group. So it's a sort of a pulling together by the researcher of everything he or she has learned about the group in all of its complexity. So how about you guys? Have you ever allowed yourself to live, for example, in an indigenous community here in the Philippines and learn their culture via immersion? That will be a cool ethnographic study to start with. And finally, we have historical research, which is the systematic collection and evaluation of data to describe, explain, and of course understand actions or events that occurred sometime in the past. So some aspect of the past is studied by perusing documents of the period, by examining relics, or by interviewing individuals who lived during that time. An attempt is then made to reconstruct what happened during that time as completely and as accurately as possible. And usually to explain why it happened. Of course, this can never be fully accomplished since we know that information from and about the past is always incomplete. That's why this is very critical. The greater our need to get the most accurate history as possible, the same amount of handicap can be met along the way. Now guys, you may ask why study the past? Of course, to make people aware of what has happened in the past because again, we can learn from them, from past failures, and even from past successes. We can also learn how things were done in the past to see if they might be applicable to present-day problems and concerns. The past can also assist us in prediction. If a particular idea or approach has been tried before, even under somewhat different circumstances, past results may offer policymakers some ideas about how present plans may turn out. So it can also test hypotheses concerning relationships or trends. So again guys, this is the last of the methodologies that I can introduce you in my humble capacity. And as you have observed, all of this fall mostly into the social sciences, because qualitative studies or qualitative methodologies is greatly exploited by social scientists. Alright, so let me now introduce you to qualitative data collection and analysis. Now take note that the primary data to collect in qualitative research are mostly worded descriptions from people's narratives and experiences. So if you happen to get numbers here, they are usually not meant to measure, but to describe. Now for qualitative data collection, you can interview informants and extract information from them. Of course, you can prepare a list of questions, or you can just do it naturally, like a normal conversation without too much preparation that can intimidate your informant. You can also opt for a focused group discussion where you can invite informants who are knowledgeable of the phenomenon of interest. And then you can start asking questions that can be answered by anybody in the group. This can be very convenient instead of making separate interviews. You can also observe a phenomenon. You can hide yourself while doing this. For example, if you are a school principal, you may install a hidden cam in every classroom to get data from teaching practices of your teachers. Again, as long as you are not violating privacy, it's permitted. I believe that the classroom is a public place. It's not private. And you can immerse with people's daily activities while doing your observation. We call it participatory observation. And of course, you need to ask for the approval of your subjects. You then record all the important aspects that you want to investigate. And last but not the least is you can examine documents and artifacts and simply get what's interesting in there. Okay, now for qualitative data analysis, we know that there will always be tons of data for qualitative studies. So we should learn to live with that if you want to venture into qualitative research. And with this amount of data, you must have a method of analysis that is practical and of course efficient. You should also be able to communicate the entire phenomenon with utmost simplicity, especially to laymen. And of course, since this is qualitative, you must ensure that you deliver your reports objectively and protected from your own bias. Now, if quantitative data analysis is a symphony based on two notes, we have means and standard deviations, qualitative data analysis is based on three notes, namely noticing, collecting, and thinking about interesting things. Now, they call this the NCT framework in qualitative data analysis. So you can start with that bulk of data in your interview transcripts, pictures, artifacts. Then you try to sort interesting themes. But of course, you also try to code all thematic elements in them. Then you think about them. As long as there is something that's not clear, you can always continue the process. So it's a continuous process of thinking, noticing, collecting information, and you report only in writing after rigorous or exhaustive examination of all qualitative data. And you then hope that people or researchers will be convinced by your report and your synthesis of the phenomenon. And finally, before I forget, we also need to look at ethics in qualitative studies, which I believe is also applicable to all research in general. Ethics explore issues of right and wrong. There are a variety of ethical issues that can arise when doing qualitative research. So we need to be critical when dealing with research problems that can elicit ethical dilemmas. I will try to discuss the major things to consider so that your research investigation is consistent with the universal principles of ethics. First is confidentiality, so you must keep the identities of your subjects secret. You will normally notice this in questionnaires where name fields are noted as optional. Informed consent means that the subjects are not forced to participate in the study. So meaning they freely submit themselves to the study after they are properly informed of the nature of the study, their role in the study, and how they will be affected by the study. So how the study can be made useful to both the researcher and the participant subjects, that is the primary function of informing the subjects. Because when the research is done, we need also to inform them of the results so they are assured that we did build our conclusions on what they really want us to tell in our research. And of course, we have to protect them from harm in as much as we also protect ourselves from any potential harm that can originate from our respondents. Deception, we should not deceive our subjects, again, by informing them truthfully. Organism handling must ensure that all organisms are well taken care of, and all of the social and psychological implications must be dealt with properly in your study. Alright, so thank you very much for watching. I'll be back to provide you with more content in research. So subscribe to my channel, and again, this is Professor Bryan Yves Araneta. See you again soon.